Hey, good to see you. I'm really glad that you're here catching Daniel chapter 5. You know, it's so interesting. Sometimes in life we get to a point where we're like, man, I'm on top of the world. There's nothing that's going to take me out. I'm doing so well. And then you get hurt. And then you lose your job. And then you get told this relationship's over. Oof, that's really tough. But it's even harder when you lose something because you got too arrogant. You know, it's interesting. In the Bible, there is a passage of scripture that is really, really convicting to me in my life, just to remember, wow, may I never take you for granted, God, and may I not take the gospel for granted. So here we enter into Daniel chapter 5, and we see a story of a man who is third in command, King Belshazzar. The text says that he showered his nobles and wise men and rulers with a huge feast. Over 1,000 people came to this party. He gets drunk, he has too much fun, and then he takes one step too far. He says, bring in verse 5. Suddenly, the fingers of a human man started writing on a plastered wall. You might be like, wait, what? Literally a hand appears on the wall and starts writing on his wall a unique ancient phrase, Mene Mene Tekel Upharsin. Why? Because of what he did the previous verse before that. It said that he took the royal goblets, the drinking glasses from the temple of God that were in gold and silver, and he brought them to all of his party guests and said, drink and enjoy the findings from the king of Judea, the God that they serve over there. The problem was that was complete blasphemy to the God of the universe. He was trying to say, in essence, listen, the God of these captives that we made, he's nothing to us because we serve the gods of this world. We have many, they have just one, and he's a nobody. Ooh, now you're getting a little bit arrogant with God himself. Now you're telling him he's no one, you're above him. You know, in this culture, there's a really dangerous thing that we do all the time, and that is the pride of our own understanding. Solomon, the greatest wise man that ever lived, Proverbs chapter 3 through 5. Be not wise in your own wisdom, but acknowledge God. Seek first his wisdom. Acknowledge his wisdom. We don't like to always do that. If you're a Christian believer and you're trying to do certain actions, make certain decisions without submitting your life, your actions to the authority of God, you're in danger of the same thing as King Belshazzar when he took the temple utensils and cups and plates and wanted to have a party saying, no, God, you're nobody. We say the same thing when we try and do our own thing and don't want to acknowledge or seek out God's wisdom too. It's a dangerous thing to be in as a young person, and the world's going in a certain direction, people doing certain things that look great, fun, amazing, wonderful, and it's like, why not? Let me just go do that. Yet, does the Bible have something to say about that issue? Probably does. Take a moment, humble yourself, step into the shoes of the wisdom of the ages, ancient times past that led God's people throughout history, through times of trouble, hardship, good, bad. There is blessing in obedience, even when it hurts. I love how Charles Stanley says this, pastor in Georgia. He says, choose to obey God and let the consequences fall on him. Listen, it is better to be obedient in this life and recognize that sometimes things won't turn out just the way you might hope, or might not turn out the way other people hope because you're not participating with them in whatever that is. But there is blessing when you're faithful. There is blessing upon blessing. Doesn't mean you're not going to have hardship. Doesn't mean that things won't always go well. But there is a blessing when you're obedient to the Lord and you acknowledge him. When you give him preference in your life. When he's number one in your decision making and in your choices. So I want to really encourage you, man, take a look at the example of this guy, because what happens next is not too pretty. So suddenly the fingers of a human hand appear and wrote on that plastered wall, and he was fear-stricken. Literally, the Bible starts talking about biology here. He loses his bowels. The Bible gets pretty explicit here. He starts freaking out. He loses bladder control. And the king, in that panic-stricken state, says, "Bring all the wise men in, everybody who can tell me what is going on." A strange random hand appears and starts writing something that's on the wall behind me. What is going on? No one can interpret it. And then the king's queen comes in, and she just barges in, which is not appropriate at that time for a queen to do. But she was like, this guy needs help. She comes in and she says, "There's only one man who can help you. He was here when your father, grandfather, was here, Nebuchadnezzar. And he did things and interpreted things that only one who has the power of God could do." And so he says, "Bring him in." Well, he comes in and he literally puts Daniel in his place immediately. "Oh, are you Daniel, who is here from way back when, who was one of the captives of Judea?" Listen, Daniel was placed in a high position. At this point, he's an old man, of course, but he still has his own wits about him. And then Daniel sees what's going on. These people are using the articles of the temple that he knew, that he experienced as a young man. Now he's pissed. He's furious. He's like, "What in the world are you doing?" He literally gets direct with him. He speaks to him very sternly. Verse 17, Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts for yourself," because there was a gift that was given to anyone who could help the king out. "No, keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I'll read the writing that's on the wall behind you." And then verse 22, "You, Belshazzar, his son of Nebuchadnezzar, he was humbled. And though you knew all this, your Nebuchadnezzar, your grandfather, when he was humbled," you remember the story when Nebuchadnezzar did the same thing, pride, arrogance, and he was driven to being kind of a wild animal. He tells him, "You knew this happened in his life. You understood the story of when he was a young man and his arrogance and cursed God and said, 'Look at everything that I've done.' And still you went ahead and did what you wanted." Verse 23, "Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of the heaven, and you took the goblets from his temple, and you brought them to your nobles, your wives, your concubines, and drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and bronze and iron and stone, which cannot see or understand." In essence, he's like, listen, you're praising the material things of your life in this world. Whoo! Talk about a moment of reflection in our life. Do we give God glory for everything he's given us? And do we worship him alone? Or are we preoccupied with the things of this world that it seems to bring us greater joy than the kingdom? Wow. Then he keeps going on. And he says, "Therefore, he has sent this hand and wrote this inscription. And here are what the words mean of Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Mene means that God has numbered your days and your reign is going to be brought to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and you're found wanting. And Phares, your kingdom is divided and is now going to be going to the Medes and the Persians." You know, there's a beautiful thing in this text, and that is this reality that this text was intended for this people of this time period in the 6th, 7th century when they were taken into exile. God's people brought into the Babylonian exile. And here, it's a hopeful message actually to them, because it's like, God is above any kingdom, even the ones who are oppressing you, the ones who are putting you down, who have bondaged you, who have placed you in a position that you have no control over. No, God is above even them. You might be in a tough spot in this world, in this moment in your life, and you're wondering, God, do you see the pain that I'm in? Do you understand this situation? Absolutely, God does. He is over everything. This is a beautiful passage to just dwell upon the reality that God can help us in every space that we're in. And so wherever you're at, my friend, I want to just leave you with a couple points of action. Please be humble. Secondly, acknowledge God and the blessings he's given you in this life. And thirdly, know that he is not only over all things, but he can help you through all things. Because that night, Belshazzar's kingdom fell apart and came in Cyrus, literally, who then next we find out sends God's people back. Not only sends them back, he blesses them and rebuilds the temple. God can bless you in so many ways, but man, choose the path of obedience and faithfulness to him and watch what he does with your life. Take care.